Several weeks ago, I sat where some of you are, watching a 3-day conference via video. The conference requires a lot of commitment and interest on the part of the student to the attendee. And you're going to want to take a break from time to time, and it's okay because the material will be available to you and you'll be able to get all of it as we go over the material that has been presented. You're going to see an overview of a topic on community chaplaincy. This is a new emerging expression of chaplaincy. And we actually had 302 slides. You will not look at all of them in our time together because we only have a few hours. So you will get the materials, you will get some handouts, and you'll have a copy of all these slides. The main point I want to make for you is make it work for you. We're surfacing some issues of awareness, but you need to take the material and make it work for you where you are. Some of you sent me some stories about your views and how you defined your local community and what is going on with the pandemic and how you view ministry. They were heart-wrenching. And so I was wanting to make this something practical, something that will be valuable to you, not only a focus on how to and what not to do, but something that is applicable where you are. As I said, this is a new emerging ministry, and it is a ministry of cooperation. There's more than just experience here, because actually there are a few of us who are experienced. But I was convicted some years ago to apply Ministry of Healing, page 143, the mantra for Adventist Chaplaincy Ministries, into action and apply it out in the field. And so I voluntarily resigned from some administrative positions to give full time to this kind of work. And I'm doing it without pay. So I'm Gary Councell, one of the community chaplains here in the United States, and I would like to just say a word of prayer as we begin looking at 4 topics: the topic of community, of our local government, of the chaplain, and then of your calling. So let us bow our heads. Gracious Lord, as our creator and ruler of the universe, you look down and see so much need, and yet the workers are few. And I thank you for each one of these men and women who have an interest in serving people in their community and representing you, our Lord Jesus Christ, to their fellow citizens. And so as we spend these few minutes together, chatting, discussing, presenting, we ask that you, through your Holy Spirit, translate my words to something that will be meaningful and inspiring and helpful to them. So direct us in our time together, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Community. What is it? That's the big question. There's 3 modules in this topic: assessment, support agencies, and cultural traditions. We can look at some definitions, and they come from the dictionary, the web, and so forth, and you can read those as well as I can. I did make my own definition of what community was, and it's the very bottom one on this long list here that you can glance over later. A gathering of strangers with similar interests who choose to live and work in the same general setting. There's lots of trends that are currently impacting our communities. And I don't want to go down a long list here of negatives, but there are a couple that are very interesting and have tremendous impact on what's taking place in our world today. We're seeing tremendous demographic changes and divisions and mass movements as people immigrate here and there around the world. We're also seeing multiple social centers where the workplace is assuming greater and greater influence in people's lives, even more sometimes than churches, even more than their own families. They spend more time at work with associates and peers than they do sometimes at home. And then we find people searching for stability, which means for those of us in denominational work and in the field of religion, that there is less loyalty to traditional religion and even denominational affiliation. Our past heritage influences our contemporary present, and our present gives direction and stimulus for the emerging future. But where these three overlap, there is a reason for existence. There are the essential elements of community life. And so we come to a time, what I call the post-Christian era. It is a time of the me generation, where things are very viewed egocentrically. It's a time of political correctness, where speech must be just so, where a very relativistic conception of divinity exists, where there's a tendency to shape God after our own images. And that is expressed in a synchronistic religion, a melding, a confusing of politics, secular humanism, and religious faith. One of the common things I encounter is the religion of what I call the common or equal gods, because there you find the most prevalent belief, and that one is no religious preference. Oh, they believe. They believe in a God, they believe in a hereafter, but they have no religious preference. Half of our world's population is non-Abrahamic, so evangelism is still needed. Every single year, we have a net gain of 60 million people in the world population. That's 3 times the membership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Even when we gain 1 million a year, we're falling 59 million behind. We can get hung up on present problems and all the challenges, and there can be some negativity with that, because the answers and solutions sometimes are like this picture here with the donkey pulling the cart lifted high in the air. But despite all of these things, we have an imperative to influence. You are my witnesses that I am the only God. Isaiah 43:12 and 1 Kings 8:60. You are the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. Let your good deeds shine before all to see, because you are a chosen people, so you can show others the goodness of God. Well, how can that be best done? We have none other than Christ's example. And again, from Ministry of Healing, page 143, we find that he mingled with men as one who desired their good. He showed sympathy, we would say empathy today. He ministered to their needs and won their confidence. And then he said, follow me. This is the formula for success. We can't improve much on that. Well, some of you may say, that sounds somewhat like Abraham Maslow's pyramid of needs from back in your Psychology 101 day in freshman year of college. The physical, the safety issues, the relational things, the self-esteem that is needed, and then he said self-actualization, we would say the spiritual. I like to put it this way, the circle with the pie division of the 7 elements of the whole person, the physical, the mental, the emotional, the volitional, the relational, and the spiritual, and of course, last but not least, the sexual. We would say the body, the brain or mind, and the feelings, mad, sad, and glad, the volitional, the dignity of free will and choice, the relational, the 5 basic ones of God to human, human's innate desire to respond to something greater than himself, the human to his life and the world around him, the human to others, the human to himself. And then there's the spiritual, where we have values, where we have beliefs and goals, and character. And so when we look at these things, sometimes we get a little confused and we end up being like in this picture with the man pulling the donkey on a cart rather than the other way around. I would like to focus more on character, those principles guiding thought and behavior, because in reality, it's one of the best investments we can make in life. 3 things nobody can take from you: character, education, and travel. They expand one's perspective and mind. Character, spiritual integrity, mental and moral qualities distinctive to an individual. The essence of being. I like this little phrase from the book Education, page 57. The greatest want of the world is the want of men. I use this with our police officers, and they're amazed at it. They say, where did you get that? And we pass it out on little cards to them, and I see it posted in the cars, posted at their workstations and so forth. We could put our motto for this conference, Micah 6:8, to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly, in another way. And I've chose to express it through what I'm familiar with, that is, the basics of character: be, know, and do. These are not compartmentalized. They are circular and interrelated, and it just keeps going. Be a spiritual leader. Be a model of spiritual integrity. Be understanding of how people live and work today. In particular, be aware of their 3 major concerns. 1, how do I make sense out of all the tragedy, trials, and troubles in our world today? And 2, how do I keep my family together in these times of conflict? And 3rd, how do I find peace, that is, contentment and joy and security in our world today? I would suggest, as you consider community chaplaincy, that you look at being a part of the community rather than an appendage off to the side. Be a team player. You're not the community messiah. Be respectful and inclusive rather than judgmental. And be a positive blessing, a part of constructive solutions instead of focusing on the negatives. And then when we come to know, you can know for certain that we should know God and Jesus Christ, of course, and the Holy Spirit in His guiding voice. We know God's words, the scriptures, John 17. Know and care for all of God's creation, how to preach and teach, know the polity and politics of your own church, how to give Christian counsel, and know ethical and moral standards, particularly physical, professional, and relational. We could wrap that up in this circle that is like a old wagon wheel with each of the teachings of our church, the spokes, but Christ, the hub, the center. And that is just one way to illustrate it. When we come to do, we have putting into action those principles that I've just talked about. Do bake a pie, and we'll talk about what a pie is. Have a vision and a purpose. Engage in community activities for the purpose of promoting spiritual well-being. Mingling with people outside of your comfort zone in the community. Practicing ministry of presence. If you look at the slide, you'll see me there when I was a young pastoral intern helping with branding calves on a ranch. If I'd have gone to see my members in their homes out in western North Dakota, I wouldn't have found anybody. But when I rode on the back of a hay wagon baling hay or helping with branding, we got to know the people by mingling and doing with them. Speak to their concerns and issues and treat others with civility, and then have a sense of humor and remain humble. Do not take yourself too seriously, because many others won't anyway. Then we ask you to reach out. And here's some questions you may want to consider. What constitutes effectiveness in ministry? Is it getting people to think and act like me so they can join my club, the church? Is it a series of activities or programs or numbers, statistics? Do you realize there is a correlation between the years that one is an Adventist and the number of non-member contacts that our church members have? And so I challenge you to mingle, as Christ did, outside of your comfort zone. And then exercise that ministry of presence and competent caring. Obtain special training to contribute effectively. And then we ask ourselves, whose needs are you seeking to meet? Christ's methods are very much like Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was the guru of non-directive counseling back in the 1950s. He discovered that one was more effective when they were accepting. He called it unconditional positive regard. If one listened attentively and did reflective mirroring, and then if he was genuinely honest in giving non-directive support. A community chaplain is going to be looking up and outward. Pray for a vision of how you and the church can serve the community. Identify a need. Repair a hole in the safety net of services. Your community may have many programs, or a few, of taking care of people who have needs. We were looking at one military installation on which I served, in which we discovered a hole in the safety net, that of widows. They had once been a part of the community when their husbands were alive and serving on active duty. And when they suddenly died, these women were often moved off post and had to start a whole different lifestyle, have new friends, etc. So we reached out. We had to first identify and find them. And then we had special meetings, and we had a soldier go and escort them onto the base. We had a meeting and a meal provided for them. It changed their whole outlook and life. It repaired a hole in the safety net of a multitude of many other programs for other people groups. There are holes in your community, I'm sure, where you can reach out and find and repair them. Pray for wisdom in providing a ministry that meets people's needs more than a need to be needed. And then get training for yourself and members. Pray that your motive for service is pure. Be a partner in the process of meeting need, rather than a parasite where you use your community or an organization or agency for your own purposes. And then bake a pie. And we're going to talk about that in a little more detail of assessment, planning, implementation, and evaluation for a successful community chaplain. Well, let's look at your community for a moment and let's ask some vital questions. Do any chaplaincies exist in public agencies where you live? Are local officials open to clergy serving as a chaplain or even an Adventist in your community? Will the conference that you work for support a pastor getting involved in community agency activities? For example, even on a part-time or volunteer basis. And what special training is required? Who pays for it? Does the chaplain wear a uniform? And what duties is the chaplain expected to perform? And if a risk is involved, is the chaplain covered by any kind of insurance in case of injury or death? These are vital questions to consider, and we'll look at them in a little more detail as we go along. Community involvement, volunteering in a community agency is open in so many ways, and engaging your church in community services is also very valuable. And so I would suggest you work to improve community agencies rather than condemn them. You can work in many different ways, through election precincts, through the emergency operations centers. In our country, we have the selective service system. Many Adventists are not aware of it, but if they were conscripted into the military, if God forbid we ever had a mass mobilization, we might want some Adventists serving on those county boards. And so here is a depiction of a whole community with all of its various aspects. And what I see is integrating discipleship through one method, through various chaplaincies, into that community. Men and women who be, who know, and who do, and can serve all aspects of that community. So the solutions? Well, we expand the concept of discipleship and evangelism and outreach. Not replacing ministry as a pastor, but as an alternative addition to that form of ministry. By following the example of Jesus and practicing ministry of presence. By knowing, ministering to the whole person. And by doing, meeting felt needs. That's living and modeling a Christ-like life. And it will make as great or greater impact than the more traditional outreach methods. So we've talked about some of the spiritual principles and the theories of community chaplaincy. Now let's look at how do we get a chaplaincy started in a community? What is some of the processes that go into beginning a community chaplaincy? And one of the first is doing an assessment. Assessments are absolutely critical. How do you view your community? Is it just your family? A circle of friends? Oh, the church. Is it prospective converts? Or is it a neighborhood with people like you and like those you ignore? A political entity with defined boundaries? Or is it all those persons in need that you can help? Or is it all persons who need assistance, whether you can provide it or not? It's interesting that Christ had a world of great need in his times and days here on earth. And if you look at Matthew 9, verse 12 and 13, and verses 35 to 38, and Mark 6, and these are all written down here in the slide for you, and Mark 8, and Luke 5, and 7, and 9, and 19, and John, all throughout the Gospels is what I'm trying to say. Jesus is pictured as looking out in his world. And the phrase is repeated, he was moved with compassion. He saw those who had need, and he approached them in a caring attitude to meet needs and go about it in a very humble way. So, as you think about your community, there is a couple of dangers. The danger of assumption and the danger of impression. Well, I've lived there for years since I know all about my community. So what do I need to go studying it and assessing it for? Or how about bias and prejudice? I know what those people are like over there. We need to learn our true selves. Jeremiah 5, Jeremiah 9, verses 8 and 9, Jeremiah 11, and Jeremiah 17, all says, hey, beware. Your heart is easily fooled. It's deceitful. You're not who you often think you are. And so it's important that we check our viewpoints, our perspectives, our biases, and we obtain factual information from various government agencies, from the Chamber of Commerce and Tourism's, from the internet, from census data, from surveys, through interviews. And then if you are in North America, you can use what is called the Precept Ministry Area Profile. And that will help for a price. It's a commercial company that will do a lot of the assessment locally for you. You want to look at population, age groups, gender mix, ethnicity, and marital status. What are the families units there? What about nationality and language groups? On the street in which I live, there are 18 houses. Only 5 of those are occupied by native-born Americans. There was another family that just moved in from Puerto Rico. They're Americans. The rest are very cosmopolitan. We have Vietnamese, Korean, Indonesian. We have from Mexico and from El Salvador, and we could go on and on. But it's a very cosmopolitan community. One would not think of that as they're driving down the street. We need to look at the social milieu in that community. Are there prevalence of addictions? What's the crime statistics? How many divorces, domestic abuse? Are there shelters available? What are the homeless? I found in my work at the airport that there are many shelters in our area and in the local counties. However, they often have restrictions. Some require so many days of background checks. Others only cater to just women with small children, or others to just a single man. We need to be aware of that. Homes caring for the elderly, and so forth. What is the economy like? Is it primarily rural, suburban, urban? Are the businesses small, privately owned, or are they chain stores and corporate sponsors? What are the employment types? Are they mostly day laborers, or are there regularly skilled workers paid hourly wages, or salaried employees? What are your median income levels? And how many are unemployed? Is it seasonal or consistent? Look at the religion in the makeup of your local area? Are there agnostics, atheists, humanists, secularists? How about Buddhists, Christian, Hindu, Islamic, Jewish, Sikh? Do you know the difference between a Sikh and a Muslim? And many other faiths. It is surprising in Northern Virginia how many different faiths we encounter and have. But most of all, sustainment is an issue. In an emergency situation that might last 3 days or longer, could your community function and meet needs without outside assistance? Look at the necessities: water, safe water. Sanitation. Why? This is preventing outbreaks of cholera and typhoid. Food. Electricity. Are the utilities down? How about medical care? Some of the stories you sent me described a shortage of health care available to the outbreaks of this recent pandemic that is global. How about communication? Is the IT systems working? Can you make telephone calls? Is the radio and TV stations broadcasting? And then very importantly, security and safety. Are the local constabulary able to handle the situation, or must there be brought in assistance? Are your transportation systems functioning? And how about heavy equipment necessary to remove damaged homes or trees or whatever? And if you found that you were not quite as independent as you believed, what would be your primary source of help? We look also at the type of government you have. Is it appointed from other echelons? Or is it elected locally? Or in some cases, it might be tribal. What is the primary source of revenue for that local community government? And how often are the officials changed? By elections, secret ballot, or by appointment? And what venues are available for residents to voice their concerns or opinions without fear of any reprisals? So when we look at some of these areas, and you say, there is great need and there is great possibilities, how do we go about starting a community chaplain program? There are numbers of ways, and 3 basic models that I would like to offer for your consideration. But let me just share an experience that may be applicable in some of your areas. When Tim Tatum retired from the military as a chaplain, he was an Advent Christian, one of those first-day Adventists that was the forerunners of Advent, the Adventist church. In fact, the little chapel by William Miller's home is owned by the Advent Christian Church. So Tim Tatum looked at our area around Washington, D.C. 3 major airports like Moscow has, like Thailand has 2, Bangkok, and London has a couple. And he said, there's nothing there for employees or for passengers traveling. He began to think about what service could be provided for these very large communities where millions of people traverse through on an annual basis. He began talking with other area clergy, and he gathered their support, and he reached out to churches. And so we have him forming what was called the Metropolitan Washington Airport Interfaith Chaplaincy Incorporated, a non-profit organization under the current laws of the land. It was funded by area churches who take an annual offering. Now, the chaplains who serve in it are all volunteers, they're not paid. But he then approached with this plan that he had established with the support of a working governing body, the Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority, and said, we have something that we wish to offer to you as a chaplaincy. And he outlined the great need, the program that they could institute, the professional standards of those who would be working, and he asked if they couldn't provide a small place to be a chapel in each of the airport terminals. The response was mixed because of the businesses, the airport being a business, did not want to hire on somebody full-time as a chaplain, but they were willing to take a group and provide them space to have an office and a small chapel. So that is one approach where you can dedicate to an agency or to a small government or a city or a county or other administrative body a chaplaincy on a voluntary basis or even a contractual basis, and you can provide a service. Such is what Tim did with this group that he set up called the Metropolitan Washington Area Interfaith Chaplaincy Incorporated. There's a second method, because there may be existing chaplaincies with the police or in schools or hospitals or whatever, or in the local jails and prisons. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Government recognized that when certain emergencies occur, that there would be a need for chaplains to minister not only to the first responders, but also to the citizens affected as victims. And so they carefully established a pool of chaplains that work out of Washington, D.C. and cover all the way from Baltimore down toward Richmond in all of the northern Virginia, upper Maryland, eastern Maryland, and the Washington, D.C. area. Surprisingly, you would think that there were, out of hundreds of clergy and religious leaders in that area, that quite a few would respond. Well, at our high point, we had about 80 or 90. At our last training conference, we only had 30 come. So out of the whole area, there is this pool of chaplains that is available for the government to reach out to and say, we need you to respond to this crisis or to this emergency. Those chaplains must be endorsed by a faith group. They must be an active practicing clergy, and they must also be willing to serve on a voluntary basis. They are loaned, in essence, by their police departments, fire departments, prison systems to meet a specific need when called upon to do so. And they must attend training, a whole day in May and a whole day in November. So that's a second way that chaplaincies for a community could be established, through a government-sponsored pooling. There's a third method, and that is when the government sponsors a chaplaincy in a particular service or agency. It might be a police department. It might be a prison system or whatever. What I'm trying to suggest here is that we start small. You begin talking about the need. You begin eliciting support from fellow clergymen and clergywomen. You've got to establish some rapport and credibility with people interested in supporting the entire community. You conduct these assessments we've been talking about. You get acquainted with leaders and with the groups that are out there. And then you begin to build consensus among the clergy for a chaplaincy to serve that community. If you wait until a crisis or an emergency develops, you're too late. You're too late. And so you begin to build this consensus together based on a good assessment of the need. And then you ensure that that chaplaincy is for the community, that it understands religious pluralism, and we'll talk about that much later, and that it does not proselytize a specific faith interest. So we developed a plan for a pool of chaplains, trained, ready to respond to community needs when called upon by officials to serve. Here's an important rule. There is no self-deployment. You don't hear of something and run off to go be the chaplain to some situation. You wait until you are called upon to serve. And so you need official sanction, some direction, some clear policies and high standards, and identification for a community chaplaincy to function. And then you establish some leadership in-house that's going to conduct some periodic training and meetings together, because you need to get to know one another. You're going to be working together in a traumatic situation. And then you're ready to start recruiting religious leaders to be those kind of chaplains and to publicize to the community that you have a chaplaincy ready to work. I'm sure that you have some questions, and I'd be happy to entertain those either in written form or telephonically as we go along. But these are important issues. All I can say is whatever model works for you, take these kind of concepts that we've just thrown out there and make it happen in your area. But don't rush into it. Build the building blocks through consensus, through assessment, and through getting sanction with your community officials. You're not in this alone. There's many support agencies out there. There's all kinds of first responders, from emergency medical transport, fire departments, the forest and wildfire fighters, search and rescue, Coast Guard, park rangers, and in some countries, game wardens. And let's not overlook another important group, that is utility workers, who have to restore electrical power, water, sewage, and communications when emergency situations arise. Law enforcement, in its many facets, both on a national level, in some cases provincial or state, that often mirror the national, and then of course the local area. And each level has a corresponding lockup that may vary from a small jail to a large prison. Many countries have correctional chaplains that are paid staff and work full-time. But in most law enforcement agencies, the chaplains are usually volunteers. In fact, in the United States, less than 100 are full-time paid positions. Almost virtually all chaplains in the country for its various law enforcement agencies are volunteers. Healthcare. We look at hospitals of many sizes and specialties, and clinics that go from general family care again to specialties. Addiction recovery places, burn treatment centers, poison treatment centers, hospices for palliative care, and then assisted living for the elderly and the invalid, nursing homes and mental institutions. These are other places that provide support in your community that could benefit from chaplaincies. And let's not overlook funeral homes, because a funeral director plays an important role in a community. Coroners, medical examiners determine the time and cause of death and perform, when necessary, autopsies. Within the window of opportunity, when you're dealing with the dead and the dying and family members, you discuss organ donating, wishes. Family directors have knowledge and expertise about cultural practices and protocols and laws, preparing the deceased body for proper disposition. And as you know, funerals are very expensive, especially if a burial plot must be procured and the body must be transported long distances. Cremation is becoming much more common in acceptance. And you should know as a community chaplain about veterans and other government officials who may be entitled to certain benefits and honors. Learn about them. When we look at education, we find universities that are on a graduate level, and sometimes military academies and non-resident schools such as the Adventist Learning Community, Griggs University, the University of Maryland, right here locally. And then community colleges such as Nova, parochial schools, public schools, and commercial training, trade schools, and public nonprofit agencies such as the Red Cross that now have spiritual care providers. And then religious organizations and government training. All of these educational opportunities are available to the community chaplain. Professionally, there are numerous associations, organizations, and societies that exist to promote high standards of practice and ethical behavior among those who are viewed as professional and give assistance to the public. You got medical and legal associations and national board certified teachers and chaplains. Participation is voluntary, but membership and certification can be long roads of hard extra work and training and expensive. And then there are faith-based organizations. We have various conference centers. Over in Thailand, there's a retreat place that is very nice and is frequently used by some very high officials and corporate leaders in the country. We have retreat centers such as out at Pine Mountain in California, rehabilitation and renewal places such as offered by Patch there in Oregon and Idaho. Sanctioned, by the way, certified by the state. Summer camps, such as at Camp Osabo in northern Michigan, and orphanages run by our church in Russia, and halfway houses for released prisoners, again in Russia, and then shelters for Pacific groups. All of these are support agencies out there that provide help to you and to the community, and which could benefit from ministry to by community chaplains. We've been talking a little bit about volunteering. A far greater number of private and volunteer organizations have formed in support of many goodwill and public causes than I can possibly list or mention. In 2018, 30.3% of adults in the United States gave more than 6.9 billion hours volunteering, worth an estimated $167 billion in economic value. Volunteers' profiles are older citizens, parents, and veterans. They give the most hours. 80% donate to worthy charities, twice what non-volunteers do. And religious charities benefited the most, followed by sports, arts, education, and youth service groups. I like this quote. A nation is strengthened by the service given by its volunteers. When we help others, differences fade away and people learn they have more in common with each other. Volunteering makes life better. There's a third area that we would like you to consider in establishing a chaplaincy, and that is being aware of the cultural traditions of your region. You're far more familiar with those than I could possibly be. I may know currently Northern Virginia, but I don't know what's going on in many sections of the world, whether it's Europe, Africa, Asia, or whatever. You know that better. But it is important to pay attention to this, and you may say, well, I'm very familiar, I was born here, I was raised here, etc. But be aware of what is appropriate for greetings, for gestures, what is accepted, what is not, what is offensive. How about hospitality? Because as a community chaplain, you may be called on to go to a number of official or public ceremonies, maybe even banquets or special meals honoring officials or whatever. And you need to be aware of certain rules of etiquette and hospitality, drinking, eating, visiting, in those kind of situations. What conversational topics would be best avoided? And what contact between the various two sexes is permitted or would be considered inappropriate. I remember traveling through Spain once and thinking that certain hours might be less trafficked, and unaware that there was siesta times from 1 or noon till 3, and then later in the evening it got very busy in the cities when we expected to be people already home for their evening meal and with time with family. So learn the various cultural patterns that go on. How one behaves and appears in public is also special. There at the airport I serve as a chaplain, I see a tremendous flow of people from many, many different countries and across America as well. And you see them from very minimal attire to very totally almost covered except for small slits for the eyes. Your appearance and dress, be aware of that. The education, are the schools graded? Is public education free, or do people have to pay for it? Do the children wear, or students I should say, uniforms? And which side of the road do people drive on? Of course, some more appropriately on the left and others on the right. What kind of public transportation is available? Is it dependable? What is the predominant type of housing? Is it all high-rise apartments? And how do you distinguish which building is yours or the address that you're going to? Is shopping done daily? When we were living in Europe, we learned that you went shopping almost every day for your fresh food and things because the refrigerator was very, very small, not like what we have here in the States. What about births? How many children does the average family have? How many single parents are there? What is the attitude toward birth control and availability? You say, no, you're getting into awful personal areas. But as a community chaplain, you need to be aware of some of these trends because you may be called upon to work with and in certain situations. What are the attitudes toward pregnancy outside of marriage, for instance, or the prevalence of abortion clinics? Is there home or hospital delivery? What kind of numbers when it comes to maternal deaths are related to childbirth? And what are the laws relating to maternal leave after childbirth? What are attitudes toward lactation and nursing practices? We at the airport have family rooms now where family members can go, or nursing mothers can go and be a family unit to use of the latrine or restroom facilities. And are there adoption processes? How about marriage? What are your legalities of age and licensing and previous marital status? How about bigamy and polygamy issues? Then you look at courtship and engagements. Are spouses selected by parents, or are spouses determined by individuals? Very interesting, one of the pastors I work with had never met his wife because his parents had selected her, and he saw her for the first time just a day before the wedding. Amazing. We would never understand that here in our Western practices of North America. Is premarital counseling and education available or even required? How about traditional ceremonies? The customs may vary for religious or for state. And then you have the availability of marriage and family counseling. We have pictures here of some of the more traditional weddings from around the world, and those are less and less used today, but are very important points in people's lives. But we want to look also at the issues around death, because as a chaplain, more than ever, you are called upon to deal with death. I get called out. In fact, last week I was just on duty for a whole week as the call-out chaplain to respond to any death that the police felt needed a chaplain assistance with throughout the county. So you do it on a county-wide basis. That's for 500,000 people in a 50-mile north-south distance, and about 20, it varies from 20 to 30 miles wide area, territory. Be aware of the views on death. Is there immediate reward? People immediately go to heaven, that view? Or soul sleep until resurrection? Or is there nothing following life? Some people would say we're reincarnated and you start over in some capacity. One of the issues that I have to deal with continually is the medical examination for the cause of death, the autopsies that sometimes are required. When we are called out and we go into a home, we often must stay there until the medical examiner or the coroner releases the deceased body to be taken to either the morgue or to the medical examining station. What is the time from death to burial? And what kind of funeral practices and traditions are observed? How are the physical bodies of the deceased disposed of? Is it by burial in the ground or at sea? Is cremation practiced? Or are individuals allowed to donate their bodies for medical research? And how about grief expression and periods of mourning? Are you aware of differences that may occur even within a country, but are regionally different? And then memorial services. And what about funerals for officials and military and police and veterans? Be aware of funerals and memorials, because as a chaplain, you will be giving them. Very frequently, the individuals that we go and visit who have had a death in the family do not have a particular faith, do not know a pastor. Maybe they've recently just moved into the area, and they ask you as the chaplain would you conduct the funeral? So every culture and society has methods and rituals and traditions how the dead are honored and the body disposed. And those methods reflect views on death, whether it's abandoned to nature, or the body is burned, or the casket is elaborately decorated, whether there's large processions that go from the home or the church to a burial place, whether large monuments are placed where the deceased is buried, and whether there are long periods of mourning or just a specified period. Candles, flowers, special dress, all convey respect because reverence for the deceased is the common theme, often at great expense and show. And so become conversant with the customs in your area, because as a community chaplain, as a chaplain involved in the public arena, you will be called upon to deal with these more often than you want to be. And then lastly, be aware of the holidays and the holy days in your particular area. What is the length of observance? Is there school and work closures? Are employees given time off for holidays? Are they paid? Are they national or patriotic? Do they honor national leaders? And then remember holy days with religious significance. Tie that in with the people and population and their faith groups that you have in your area. And be aware of those that are significant to them. If you look on the internet site, Interfaith Calendar, it seems like almost every day of the year is of some religious significance to some group. You can't take into account all of them, but you can at least be aware of the primary ones with religious significance. And then be familiar with, as Seventh-day Adventists, the Christian liturgical calendar. Pentecost, 50 days after resurrection or Easter. Sometimes we think more about what is tied to our own denominational calendar, but be aware of the Christian liturgical calendar. As you contemplate a community chaplaincy, we've talked about doing assessments, several models for how you might start a chaplaincy in the community, and some other considerations such as the support agencies that are there that may have a chaplaincy or may not have, that would benefit from chaplaincies, whether you're going to use existing chaplaincies to form a pool, and whether you will seek to work through those agencies. And then some of the cultural traditions that we have discussed here today. All of these things play into setting up and establishing a chaplaincy that will serve a community in those times of crisis or emergency or special need, when you are called out as that clergy representative to meet human need in a specific situation. I can't stress enough the importance of not playing the Lone Ranger, the Messiah type, and thinking you can do this on your own by yourself. It is a cooperative ministry where you work with other clergy of other faiths and begin to form a response team that is sanctioned and recognized and has a purpose, has some policies in place, and where government leaders know that you exist and call on you as needed, and where you might even be doing some dry run tests just to see how you will all work together. I know you may have questions we haven't answered, but I hope we've surfaced some issues that will get you thinking about what you may need to do in your local region to establish this. Let me just say this, as I mentioned, here in the DC area, where we've had disaster and crises and terroristic threats, when you think even 50 or 60 clergy who are trained chaplains are a pool ready to be called out to meet a great need if there was ever a huge disaster or crisis and emergency. That's very few. That's very few. In our county where I serve, we have 8 of us who are active with the police and fire for 500,000 people. Again, very few. All I can say is start now, get a group together, start preparing for those times when the worst might happen, and be ready, be ready. As Jesus said, be ye ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, those kind of events may occur. May God bless you as we contemplate your community.